in Year C, Proper 13. And, this is all just vanity, so let's just quit. Never mind. Forget it. Turn it off. Turn off the machine. Well, that'll be a hint as to where we're going. Make sure we got the collect right. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at the collect. Let us pray. Almighty and merciful God, of whose only gift it cometh that thy faithful people do unto thee true and laudable service, grant, we beseech thee, that we may run without stumbling to obtain thy heavenly promises, through Jesus Christ, thy Son, our Lord, who liveth and reigneth with thee, in the unity of the Holy Ghost, ever one God, world without end. Amen. So we're praying for fidelity to the Lord, to not give up, not throw in the towel, not just say it's all not worth anything, but to stick with him. And of course, that's mainly about the tough times. I always think about the wedding liturgy and the vows and the, actually I think for a lot of people the declaration of consent is more familiar than the vows. They're slightly different. But of course, the wonderful phrasing, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, sickness and in health. You don't really have to make any promises for the better. It's just the worse. That's you have to worry about, You don't worry about somebody running away in health, it's in sickness that you have to worry about. But so there's a couple of times in a sermon where I've been like, remember the vows, for better, for health. I forget the other one. Anyway, so you may have to worry about the tough times, because that's when you feel like quitting. That's when you feel like running away. That's when you feel like giving in.
But if you don't, there's a lot of reward.
Yeah, well, and oftentimes, well, you think about something in the way it grows. That is very often the time when it does most growth is not in the rainy part, but in the dry bit, where it sends down the roots further to seek out moisture and so on. So it's when times are tough that sometimes we do our growing that we should. Our first reading is from Ecclesiastes, and if I remember correctly, the first time I preached on this was right after our parish day school closed at St. Albans. And it was something that wasn't entirely unexpected, just because they've been having a difficult time and struggling for year after year after year. And it just got to where they were just too far behind and just couldn't function anymore. And they thought they were going to be able to, they probably squeezed out at least 2, maybe 3 more years, really, of life than it should have had. And so around midsummer, they announced, we can't come back. We can't make it through the year. And, it was people had poured their energy, their life into this project, and many people donated a lot of money, and they'd even kind of done a Hail Mary and moved campuses to, hopefully that would kind of be the magic part of it that would make it flourish. But it just, if it did better, it wasn't enough, I guess. Anyway. And so that, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What was it ever worth for? And that really resonated. But then I think about, why do we engage in this school building project? Was it so that we could amass a group of buildings that would stand there for a long time? Or was it so we could change lives? And those lives are always passing through, The people who went there 20 years ago are not still sitting in the classroom. So there's a lot of moments in our lives that seem like they might be wasted, and ironically, they're sort of the most precious and most enduring. And then a lot of things we thought important at the time end up, in hindsight, being, what was the point, Why was I so fretting that history test and pulled an all-nighter and was just agonizing over it. Well, in the long run, it doesn't matter too much. But maybe those little moments of being under fire and learning coping skills or encouraging someone else, or, those are kind of the precious moments that stay with us and are kind of the enduring building blocks of life. Well, we have Ecclesiastes 1:12 to 2, verse 11. Talk a little bit about Ecclesiastes here. What is this book? It means, just like Ecclesiasticus, the church book. So it begins the words of the teacher, or in some translations, I think the King James, the preacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So it's technically anonymous, but it gives a description that seems to fit Solomon. There's really only 2 kings that ruled, well, I guess you could say 3, the entire, all 12 tribes together. And that was, of course, Saul in the beginning, and then David, and then Solomon. After Solomon, his 2 sons split up the kingdom and go their separate ways. And part of that is because of his corruption, really. And he's known for wisdom, and yet, in a sense, he's also known for folly. He's known for amassing great wealth, but also that same wealth and the chore of amassing it is kind of the undoing of the nation. So the whole splitting of the nation apart was really like, your dad was really a hard man and asked too much of us, and we would like a little relief under this new regime with with you in charge, the son, Rehoboam or Jeroboam. I always forget which is which, because one goes to the north, one goes to the south. And
that was on the test.
Yeah, that was on the test. And then he thinks about it and comes back and he's like, you thought my dad was difficult. Just wait. You haven't seen nothing yet. And so the north goes their separate ways. But anyway, let's look at some of the notes about this. So King Solomon, renowned for his wisdom and his riches, and of course, in the popular view, those seem to kind of go together. If you have a lot of stuff, that means you're very blessed. That means you know what you're talking about. But he's kind of reflecting back and saying, it's not that simple. The theological contribution says the book of Ecclesiastes has a powerful message for our selfish, materialistic age. It teaches that great accomplishments and earthly possessions alone do not bring lasting happiness. True satisfaction comes from serving God and following His will for our lives. But another important truth from Ecclesiastes, which we often overlook, is that life is to be enjoyed. Quote, every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good things of all his labor. It is the gift of God. And that's very much a part of the Jewish view of the commandments, that the commandments are given for our happiness, our enjoyment, to make life good, not to make life hard. That's not why God gave His commandments. He gave it to us for our benefit, that we should enjoy life and live the happy, fulfilled kind of life. And that comes through following the will of the designer of human life. Also, a couple notes from Father Fuller. He says, Ecclesiastes is not one of the most loved books of the Bible. In fact, we may sometimes wonder why it is in there at all. Sir Edwin Hoskins, which was Father Fuller's mentor, used to say that Ecclesiastes is the most Christian book in the Old Testament. What he meant was that Ecclesiastes is a ruthless exposure of what human life is apart from God, and if taken really seriously, prepares the way for a hearing of the gospel of Christ. Ecclesiastes is not so much good news as it is the bad news that has to be heard before the good news becomes audible. Vanity of vanities. All of human life is ultimately futile and meaningless if viewed in itself apart from God. And also we should have a note about this vanity of vanities. It could also be translated mystery of mysteries. So the word is Abel, which is the word of Adam and Eve's son, Abel. And it means like mist or vapor. So it's like, it could be either saying, I think I built something solid, but in the end it turned out to just be a mirage, you know. Or it could mean more like, this is like a misty cloud. I can hardly see through it. Who knows what lies behind my perceptions, Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. Mystery of mysteries. Who can figure it out? And they both kind of seem to work. As you go on, perhaps you might say that vanity is more applicable because he talks about, how things are disappointing to him and that kind of thing. So I guess you could say that fits. But I think they both kind of work, both translations. Vanity of vanity or mystery of mysteries.
That cloud or the mist or something like that, that's evocative.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
All right, let's pick up Ecclesiastes 1, beginning in verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my mind to seek and to search out, by wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the sons of men to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. I said to myself, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my mind to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. I said to myself, come now, I will make a test of pleasure, enjoy yourself. But also this was also vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I search with my mind how to cheer my body with wine, my mind still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks, and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of the growing trees. I made male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, man's delight. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered that all that my hands had done, and the toil that I had spent in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So this is sort of said by, the guy who has everything. What do you get for the guy who has everything, as a Christmas gift? And he says, it's like, I went for it. I just dove in head first and went in for pleasure and accumulating wealth. And I'm looking back now and why? Well, what did it get me? Didn't really, I can see the hollowness of it now, And he doesn't really mention anywhere that I know of, I mean, it's been a long time since I read through the whole thing, about the loss of the northern kingdom. But surely that has to be kind of at the back of his mind. It's like I built this fabulous palace and I have everything that a great king would want, and yet, half or more of my kingdom has disappeared. It's not mine anymore. Well, actually, it will be under his successors. So never mind. That would be Rehoboam's what he might be thinking. But he is very much like Edwin Hoskins says, kind of like setting up for the good news by giving the bad news. That I've had everything that a man could want and strive for. I had success after success after success, and yet in the end, it seemed a bit hollow. Where was the reward? I'm longing for something more. And we might say that in a very real sense, it touches more deeply upon the spiritual aspect of a human being. This idea that, as they always say, the God-shaped hole, that nothing else can quite adequately fill. Just as an aside, I remember in seminary, everyone has to give a senior sermon. And so one of the classmates in the class before me gave his, and he went on this extended illustration of this prostitute, and she had a God-shaped hole, and only Jesus could fill it. Oh my gosh. And I'm just trying to sit there with a straight face, not smirk, not crack up, but just say, yes.
Well, you know, if you don't, I'm 84, or be 84 Saturday, and you look back, and if you don't have love and Jesus in your heart, and that God-shaped hole kind of filled, it's all BS.
You might think, what would the old me, if he had an opportunity to write a letter to the young me, what would I write to myself? When I have all the hindsight that I can possibly have. In a sense, that's kind of what he's going after here. What would I write as a letter to myself, my young self, to sort of be mindful of and gain some perspective on. Unfortunately, we really only get that letter when we get old, and we're able to write the letter. But there is a certain sense where we can have an opportunity to advance by studying wisdom and receiving and listening to wisdom of others who have gone before us, and might have something to say. Such is also the folly of, what do they call it, youth culture. This idea that young people learn best from young people. Well, maybe some things, but not the important things, perhaps. And so it's always been very strong cultures that value their elders and the wisdom of the elders, and that makes sense. Well, let's look at the Psalm. They changed up a little bit the Psalm from the 1979 prayer book, where the first part of it was mandatory. No, I guess they didn't. I guess it's the same. Yeah, verses 1 through 12 or 11, that's what it is here, is the mandatory part. And then the rest of it goes to verse 20. So yeah, Psalm 49. I was thinking for some reason that they switched it around, but it is that way. Oh, hear ye this, all ye people. Ponder it with your ears, all ye that dwell in the world. High and low, rich and poor, one with another. My mouth shall speak of wisdom, and my heart shall muse of understanding. I will incline mine ear to the parable, and show my dark speech upon the harp. Wherefore should I fear in the days of evil, when wickedness at my heels compasses me round about? There be some that put their trust in their goods, and boast themselves of the multitude of their riches. But no man may deliver his brother, nor give a ransom unto God for him. For it cost more to redeem their souls, so that he must let that alone forever. that he shall live alway and not see the grave. For he seeth that wise men also die and perish altogether, as well as the ignorant and foolish, and leave their riches for other. And yet they think that their houses shall continue forever, and that their dwelling places shall endure from one generation to another, and call the lands after their own names. And by the way, the attribution on this psalm is that it is a psalm of the sons of Korah, so one of the Korite anthems.
That's pretty much exactly what we just heard.
Yeah, there's a lot of the psalm. I don't know if the psalm is chosen. I guess it is chosen thematically to line up. Say the epistle is not, and it will kind of relate on this occasion, but that's just a coincidence. But I guess the psalm is paired up thematically. So we continue our meditation on wisdom and also folly. Father Reardon has some good notes on this one. He says this is basically a meditation on the theme of having to do with the pursuit of wisdom. It calls upon the human mind, any human mind. It kind of has a universal address and appeal, not necessarily a specifically religious one, to think deeply about universal facts and phenomena of human life. And he's going to sort of take his time in the matter with pondering this question. Now, the thing that most strikes the psalmist about human existence is that it ends in death. And he is a fool who forgets or neglects this truth. We'll find that exactly in the gospel. He says graves tend to be dug so roughly the same depth that death has been called the great leveler. Those who are high and low in life all end up 6 feet under, as it were. So death is for the great leveler, the great democratizer. They say the cemetery is like a democracy. There's no class structure in it, really. And that's all on the surface level. And so he concludes that this psalm is a plain, straightforward summons to a godly fear, in mind of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So it's a summons to pursue wisdom, very much continuing on the thought line of what we got in Ecclesiastes. Although perhaps, I don't know. I was going to say with a little less dour spirit, but perhaps if it's any less, it's not too much, I guess. It's very ponderous. Well, let's see how coincidentally the epistle might correlate and overlap and play against what we've already had before. So here we tend to go kind of back to back with the epistle, but here we skipped a little bit going into the second half of chapter 3. So this is Colossians 3, verses 5 through 17. Put to death what is earthly in you: fornication, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. On account of these, the wrath of God is coming. In these you once walked when you lived in them, but now put them all away: anger, wrath, malice, slander, and foul talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old nature with its practices, and have put on the new nature, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its Creator. Here there cannot be Greek and Jew, circumcised and uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free man, but Christ is all and in all. Put on then, as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassion, kindness, lowliness, meekness, and patience, forbearing one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, and sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. So it's like there's a lot of memory verses that are packed into this one. It's hard to pick one out as being the best one. I guess I would go with the last line, whatever you do, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus. But he begins with something that he's talked about elsewhere in his letters, this idea of what we call mortification. When we hear that word, we tend to have a negative association with it as a bad thing, like, nuns with the rulers whacking your hands or something like that. But that's what the word mortify means. It means put to death, mortis. Put to death what is earthly in you, or what is fleshly. So he's talked elsewhere, what are the works of the flesh? There are all these kinds of things, impurity, passions, evil desires. And this is the idea that, God, in making the human being, gives him passions. And those are a necessary component for him to have life. And because if he didn't have passions, he wouldn't strive for things. If he didn't have an appetite for food, he'd never put anything in his mouth and chew it up and swallow it just because it's something to do. He has to have an appetite. He has to draw to that. He has to have a thirst for it, as it were. If he didn't have an appetite for sex, nobody would do that. And then the human race, would be gone the first day. Well, not the first day, but the first couple. If he didn't have an appetite for wealth, we would never build, we would never grow as a human society. We would still be living, in caves and using bear skins and all that kind of stuff. So we have to have these appetites, but they can easily get out of control and overwhelm us. And so what happened in the fall, in the Garden of Eden, is that we lost what we call our preternatural gifts. And one of those was the gift of integrity. We might say harmony or balance, where our appetites don't overwhelm us, but rather they are kept in place and under the control of reason. Yeah. So now that we're on the other side of Eden, everything is out of whack, out of balance. And, much like when you have an imbalance of, some nutrient in your body and it doesn't function correctly, it's kind of the same kind of thing with our soul. It doesn't work right when we're out of balance. And so the whole project of moral theology is about practicing virtue, about putting things back in balance, not to suppress, not to deny that you have hungers, but to keep them in a proper perspective and ordered by reason, that kind of thing. So he says, put these things to death in you, these kind of things that overwhelm you. Remember that God has turned you into a new creation. He's put you back to the way that you were. So he's done away original sin by restoring you to communion with God. But as bit by bit, we got to pull out these old things that leave their mark. Put away all things like wrath, malice, anger, foul talk, and so on. Cultivate good things. Cultivate the positive. Verse 12, put on as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassion, kindness, lowliness, meekness, and patience, being forgiving, just like God forgave us. So we want, and he says, above all, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony, perfect balance, right, ordered, virtuous living. And then you will find that the peace of Christ dwells in your hearts and rules in your life. And so when he says in verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly and teach and admonish one another in all wisdom, is a reminder that you can't just kind of coast. You can't just say, well, I've reached virtue. Now I can just sit back and relax. Well, you got to keep fighting the fight because these things will creep back up. It's just like, those weeds will keep sprouting up. You got to keep pulling them down. Well, it drives me crazy. I get vines growing on my fence. And,
Vines.
I don't know what kind they are, but I don't want them there. So I go and pull them down, and then lo and behold, there they go again. And as much as I try to dig it out and find the source and cut it off at the root, it always finds a way. I'd have to dig a hole about 10 feet deep and wide to...
The ones out here on the hedges, some of the roots are 15 feet long.
Yeah, well, I think vines are kind of grow all the way around the house and almost envelop it like an evil monster just reaching out its hand. So you got to keep fighting. You got to keep fighting the good faith, fight of the faith. And he also kind of, much like, the great leveler, that idea that we all are in this together. Verse 11, he says, in this fight, there cannot be Greek and Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave, free man. All are in the same boat on this one. What is a Scythian? I think he's sort of like a barbarian from the east. I think the Scythians were Persian, or all from that area. It's strange that he throws that sort of one outside, unexpected
Must have been pretty bad guys.
name call in there. Yeah, or maybe there was a particular Scythian in the church in Colossae that was well known or something. I don't know. Well, let's look at the gospel. So, like we mentioned, these themes on this particular Sunday, all pretty tight. Even the epistle, which is just kind of a coincidental correspondence, corresponds pretty well. So we don't, like we have done for the past couple of weeks, go sort of just back to back to back, but we skip a little bit from last week. So last time we were at the beginning of chapter 11 with the Lord's Prayer. And now we skip the rest of 11 and go a little bit into chapter 12 and pick up at verse 13, where he has a parable, which is often called the parable of the rich fool. One of the multitude said to Jesus, "Teacher," or Rabbi, "bid my brother divide the inheritance with me." But one said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or divider over you?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of all covetousness. For man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man brought forth plentifully. And he thought to himself, What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.
That's what I was referring to accidentally and didn't know it was there.
And it's also very similar to Jesus when he says, I think it was just, was it last Sunday or anyway, about storing up treasures in heaven. Well, I guess it wasn't last week. Anyway, very much a similar idea. And very similar, of course, to the meditation that we get in Ecclesiastes about vanity. You know, what is it all worth in the end if I have great wealth and amass all these things? And also, Paul very similarly says in 1 Corinthians 13, of course, you know, if I have faith that can move mountains and don't have love, Love is the thing that ties it all together. I'm like a noisy cymbal or clanging gong. Or I think a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Same difference.
But it's changed, and I like the poetic of that particular verse. In the old one, it was through a glass darkly.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so poetic, and later translations have different words.
Well, that's a lot like, if we consider mystery of mysteries, it was all mystery, We don't have that hindsight. If only our hindsight could be like if only our foresight could be like our hindsight, we might have a better opportunity of not making mistakes. But even then, I'd never be surprised at the human capacity for making mistakes in spite of knowing better. That's what concupiscence is all about. The tendency to do the wrong thing, even though you know better.
Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yes. Snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Fuller says the rich fool is a man who lived his life without reference to God and was caught in the toils of futility and meaningless. He organized his life without reference to the transcendent. He did not seek the things that are above. So comes the crashing judgment. This night, your soul, that is your life, is required of you. Because he viewed his present existence as autonomous without any reference to God, because he organized it without reference to the transcendent upon which it depends. Note how he thought his own existence was under his own control. It came as a shock to learn that it was God's to give and God's to take away. The rich fool condemns himself to an existence that is, qualitatively speaking, a life in death. And of course, very much a contrast with what Job says as he endures his hardships, where he says, the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. That's why we say Job has great faith, because he's able to, he has that kind of hindsight as foresight, I think. One thing also that we might notice here is, how might this have gone differently? So he has an abundant crop, and it's kind of thing where, he's really, you might make the analogy of, in your business, you get a really great contract that goes way and far above, everything you've had before. You're raking in a lot more dough than you ever expected. What do you do with it? Well, the wise businessman, according to at least the worldly wisdom, says this is the time to expand, and that's the way he's thinking here. But he could have also thought, this is the time to give away some things, to give away the extra. So he could have stored his crops in his neighbors, as it were. But instead, he stores it for himself alone. And I thought Barclay's commentary says something like that. Oh yeah, he mentioned, well, it's not quite the same thing, but he mentioned John Wesley had a rule of life to save all that he could and give all that he could. So he says when he was at Oxford, he had an income of £30 a year. So he lived on £28 and gave £2 away. When his income was increased to £60 and then to £90 and £120 a year, he still continued to live on £28 and gave the balance away. So it's interesting if this guy had that kind of perspective on life, when he had a great year of abundant increase, his first instinct and intuitive thought would be to turn to giving the excess away. And that's why there's a kind of a difference between the nouveau riche and the old riche. I don't know what you call it. I don't know what that's. The old rich. The new rich haven't been raised with that, because like the old rich, you raise your children like, you're not like other people. You have a great responsibility. You can't just live your life and get rid of your stuff. You have to live your life for others. You have to be responsible for society, you know, for building the libraries and endowing the hospitals and all that kind of stuff, you know. Whereas, you know, people who come into money overnight, they don't have that kind of upbringing and training to handle this kind of influx of money. And for a lot of them, it can be very destructive. Money is sort of like pouring gasoline on a fire. You'll just get more of whatever is already there, whether it's good or bad. So, you know, you give it to a virtuous person, you get a lot of virtuous stuff. You give it to a greedy person, a self-absorbed person, you get a lot of problems. It just magnifies things.
The first response of these things is like the old Baptist preacher says he was preaching to the choir. I mean, it's rare for young people to really understand what the what's the word I want to use, it's a puzzle, or it's a something that new car is not going to make you happy.
Yeah.
And you're going to see one, your neighbor has a better one or something like that.
Yeah, and we see that, you know, very often poorer people, their priorities will be askew, you know, so you pour all your money into your car and very little into, you know, your buying a house for the future, that kind of thing. It just kind of like everything shifts. And we've done a horrible job in sort of passing down this common sense kind of stuff about managing your life and managing your money and all that kind of thing. That's why Dave Ramsey has been a great success in his teaching. It's about teaching that common sense that people didn't get growing up. You know, their dad never showed them how to handle their money, as it were.
Michelle, oh gosh, she has a Sunday, I can't think of her last name, it's not the president's wife. Anyway, she has Dave Ramsey-like avoid debt. There's no such good thing as good debt.
Mm-hmm.
And her grandmother was known as Big Mama. And, you know, she always said, don't owe no man nothing.
Yeah. And that's in the Proverbs, that the debtor is the slave to the lender, you know. And
then when you do apply yourself to these things and you get to be in a position of ease, if you are, and then you're in a position to give things away, or you see things, that
yeah.
I can help in this way, or.
But there's also a trap there. It's like you have to learn to give things away early. You can't just say, well, once I get, you know, everything paid for and once I'm living high on the hog, then I can give things away. Yes. Well, you got to start like Wesley.
The widow's mite.
Well, it's like John Wesley, you know, when he was making 30 pounds a year, he would live on 28 and give 2 away. And then he was able to give away more and more and more because he like, well, I don't need extra. I can still keep living simply and do away with the rest of it.
I've never heard that. That's a very...
Well, yeah, it's very impressive. I mean, it may not be exactly... yeah, because I'm like, I would imagine over decades, you probably can't still live the same at 28 pounds a year, but it might be different in those days. Certainly they didn't have the kind of inflationary pressure that we do with our economic system, where it's just, I mean, I have really struggled to keep, you know, buying the same amount of groceries with the same amount of dollars. That certainly doesn't work that way.
No.
But somehow we've been able to keep our money budget pretty much the same for a long time. but it just kind of gets more and more frugal. And often we start to dip into a different envelope for things that we need. Just kind of depends.
Well, but it's the struggle. I mean, it's the idea that
Mm-hmm.
you have a plan and that you're working the plan. And a lot of people just don't think about, I want this now.
Yeah.
I have a relative that always wants, there's no delayed gratification. He wants it now.
Yeah. Well, and delayed gratification, that's one of the biggest lessons that we have failed to pass on. And in fact, we need to really make some of these things illegal. There's everybody's familiar with credit cards, but one of the newer things is, and I don't know the name for it, but it's basically instant credit, pay now, or no, buy now, pay later. But it's not a credit card. It's just it's a finance thing where you like, and it's even little menial things like you can buy a pizza or something, and split it up into quarterly payments, and you get it now and then you pay it off, over the course of whatever, a month or.
Well, like people don't see the trap of, they buy a car and they finance it for 72 months. That's 6 years. Nowadays it's not so bad, but average person changes cars every couple of years.
Yeah.
Well, then you're just rolling that debt over.
Well, and everybody thinks per month. What is the cost per month?
Yeah.
And of course, you got to ask what is the cost per month because you got to pay it per month. But you also need to keep it in perspective, the long term.
Yeah, how much interest am I paying? And just a couple of fractions make a whole big difference. I mean.
Yeah. Well, the longer you go,
Yeah.
the more difference it makes.
Yeah, and refinancing your house when the rates go down, and refinancing your house and putting it back in the house, don't spend it. I know people that refinance their house twice and spend it all, and people that refinance their house and put it back and saved 10, 12 years of mortgage payments. But sometimes that's a lot of this, you sound like a fool, but betting on the come, if the come doesn't come, then you're screwed. But I'm just no coot saying that kind of stuff.
And if you're in debt, please visit our sponsor. And regardless of our money situation, the one thing that we all struggle with is that practicing virtue, that putting to death what is earthly and fleshly in us, that, because that's what it's appealing to when we get the buy now, pay later, is instant satisfaction, instant pleasure, gratification. So putting those impulses to death is about cultivating, the value of what comes later. So delayed gratification is basically that process of mortification of the appetites. So we'll leave it at that.
Very good, Father. Thank you.